The men who left her to die were the same men who'd eaten at her table. They were the same men who'd clapped her husband on the back and called him brother. Sarah Mitchell was 8 months pregnant, perched on the back of a groaning wagon, and the cold of the Colorado mountains was already sinking into her bones. The September sun was a liar, offering light but no warmth. It painted the pines in shades of amber and gold, a beautiful funeral for a beautiful dream. The Pikes Peak Gold Rush. It sounded like a song, a promise whispered from the west. For Sarah, it had become a nightmare. Her husband, William, was somewhere up ahead with the scouting party. He'd been a bookkeeper back in Springfield, a man of soft hands and quiet evenings. But gold fever had burned that man away, leaving a stranger with flinty eyes who stared at maps all night and talked of claims and fortunes she couldn't picture. He'd sold their home, their shop, everything they were, for a chance at being something else, and now she was just another piece of excess weight. The wagon train had started with 15 wagons. Now there were 8. The mountains had a way of collecting their toll. Alliances frayed, promises broke, people disappeared. The wagon lurched to a stop. Thomas Caldwell, the elder of the 2 brothers who owned the wagon, didn't even look back at her. His back was a stiff, straight line of annoyance. "Getting steeper," his brother Robert called out, a rifle resting across his knees. "Gotta lighten the load again." Sarah tensed. A cold dread, colder than the mountain air, washed over her. They'd already thrown out the furniture, the books, the family heirlooms. Her mother's rocking chair was probably still sitting 100 miles back on the trail, a lonely ghost watching the horizon. All she had left were the clothes on her back and a small leather journal tucked in her pocket. There was nothing left to discard, except people. The thought landed with the force of a physical blow. Thomas climbed down from the driver's seat. He looked up the trail where the other wagons were already pulling away, disappearing around a bend. No one looked back. That was the rule of the rush. Don't look back. Looking back costs you time, and time costs you gold. "William won't be back till evening," Robert said, his voice flat. "And that storm's coming in." He gestured to the west where dark, bruised clouds gathered, heavy with the threat of early snow. The baby inside her kicked, a hard, insistent thump, as if it knew, as if it was already fighting for its life. Robert walked to the back of the wagon, his shadow falling over Sarah. He wouldn't meet her eyes. "Ma'am," he said, the word a mockery of respect, "we need you to get down." The air left her lungs. "You mean me?" she whispered. "I'm the weight you're lightening?" The brothers exchanged a look. It wasn't guilt. It was confirmation, an agreement. "William wouldn't allow this," she said, her voice finding a strength she didn't feel. "I'm his wife. I'm carrying his child." "Which makes you a burden," Thomas replied, his voice as cold and hard as the rocks around them. "This trail is killing the oxen. We can't risk the whole party for one woman." One woman. Yesterday she was Sarah. Today she was a problem to be solved. "You can't just leave me here," she pleaded, her eyes scanning the vast, empty wilderness. The nearest settlement was days behind them. The next was an unknown distance ahead, across passes that were about to be choked with snow. "We ain't heartless," Thomas said, and the lie was so bald it was almost funny. He reached into the wagon and pulled out a small bundle. Her provisions, a threadbare canvas tent, a single blanket, a small bag of jerky and hardtack, a tin cup and a knife. Enough to give them the illusion of charity. Enough to ensure her death would be slow instead of quick. "William will come back for you," Robert added, his gaze fixed on a distant peak. "Soon as we make camp, we'll send him." They both knew it was another lie. The scouting party was miles ahead. By the time William even realized she was gone, turning back would mean giving up his claim. It would mean choosing her over the fortune they had sacrificed everything for. And the woman who had shared his bed for 5 years knew, with a certainty that broke her heart, which one he would choose. She didn't scream. She didn't beg. A part of her, a hard, resilient core she didn't know she possessed, refused to give them the satisfaction. She stood on the side of the trail, the pathetic pile of supplies at her feet, and watched in absolute silence as the wagon lurched forward. It groaned around the bend, its dust settling on her like a burial shroud. Then there was nothing. Just the whisper of the wind through the pines and the suffocating silence of a world that didn't care if she lived or died. The mountains of Colorado, 1858, a land haunted by ambition, and now haunted by her. She was utterly, completely alone, and the storm was coming. For a long time, Sarah just stood there. The shock was a physical thing, a heavy blanket that smothered thought and feeling. The world was a painting, beautiful and terrifying, and she wasn't part of it. She was just an observer, watching her own life end. The baby kicked again, a sharp, angry jab that broke the spell. It was a demand. Do something. Live. The anger came then, hot and clean, burning away the shock. Anger at the Caldwells for their casual cruelty. Anger at the others who had simply looked away. But most of all, a deep, volcanic anger at William. William, who had filled her head with promises of a golden future, who had dragged her into this wilderness, and who had ridden ahead, leaving her exposed and vulnerable. He hadn't held the gun, but he had loaded it. He had pointed it. The Caldwells just pulled the trigger. She took stock of her surroundings. The trail was a narrow scar on the mountainside. Below, a valley thick with pine. Above, rocky slopes clawing at the sky. Survival was a fantasy. A woman, alone, 8 months pregnant, with a blizzard on the way. It was a joke with a cruel punchline. But the joke wasn't over yet. The journey had stripped away the delicate woman from Springfield. She'd learned to read the land, to find water, to know which berries would kill you and which would keep you alive for one more day. She wasn't helpless. She was just doomed, but she would not die waiting. With movements made clumsy by her swollen belly, she gathered her meager supplies. She found a sheltered spot just off the trail, a small alcove formed by a cluster of boulders. If William did come back, a tiny, flickering ember of hope she couldn't quite extinguish, he would need to see her. Pitching the tent was a battle. Her body screamed with every bend, every stretch. By the time the canvas was secured, the first fat drops of rain were falling, cold and heavy. She crawled inside just as the sky ripped open. Rain hammered the thin canvas. The tent, old and worn, began to leak almost immediately. She set the tin cup to catch one drip, using the blanket to shield herself from the others. As darkness fell, the temperature plummeted. The rain turned to sleet, then to a thick, wet snow. Huddled in the damp, cramped space, Sarah finally let herself weep. Not for fear, but for rage. When the tears ran dry, she pulled out her journal and a stub of pencil. By the faint gray light filtering through the canvas, she wrote. She recorded the names of the Caldwell brothers. She described their actions. She wrote about the wagon pulling away, about the silence they left behind. It wasn't a diary entry, it was a testimony. If she died here, she would not die anonymously. Her story would remain, a curse written in a lonely tent. The simple act of writing calmed her. It was a piece of her old life, a piece of civilization in the heart of savagery. Her plan was simple. At dawn, she would follow the trail forward. Moving was better than waiting for a rescue that would never come. She would walk until she couldn't walk anymore. She would walk until she found a settlement or until the mountain took her. It was the only choice she had left. She drifted into a fitful sleep, her body curled protectively around her unborn child. She dreamed of her home in Springfield, of the smell of baking bread and the warmth of a real bed. Then the dream soured. The trail stretched on forever, and William was always just ahead, just around the next bend, his back always turned to her. She woke with a gasp several times, convinced she heard footsteps outside. But it was just snow sliding from pine branches, a sound like a footstep in the dark. Dawn was not a sunrise, but a slow, gray lightening of the world. She crawled out of the tent into a landscape transformed. A thick blanket of wet snow covered everything, muffling sound, turning the world into a silent, white prison. The air was sharp, brittle with the promise of true winter. She ate a small piece of jerky, chewing slowly, rationing. Her hands were numb as she dismantled the tent. Every movement was an agony. A new kind of pain had started in her lower back, a dull, rhythmic ache that came and went. Not yet, she prayed. Please, not yet. She fashioned the tent canvas into a crude pack and began to walk. The trail was a nightmare of mud and slick, melting snow. She used a fallen branch as a walking stick, testing each step before putting her full weight down. By midday, the clouds rolled back in, darker and heavier than before. The snow began again, not the wet slush of the morning, but hard, dry flakes that stung her face and accumulated quickly. Her progress slowed to a crawl. Her shoes were soaked, her feet 2 blocks of unfeeling ice. She slipped twice, catching herself on low-hanging branches. The third time, her foot landed on a snow-covered rock that twisted beneath her weight. She went down hard, sliding several feet down the steep slope before her flailing hands found the trunk of a small pine. A blinding electric pain shot through her ankle, but that wasn't the worst of it. As she lay in the snow, a powerful cramp seized her abdomen, stealing her breath. It was stronger than the backache, a tightening, gripping fist deep inside her. It held her for a long moment, then slowly, agonizingly, released its hold. She knew with absolute certainty what was happening. The fall had triggered it. Her body, pushed beyond its limits, had made its own decision. The baby was coming. Here, on a desolate mountainside, in the middle of a blizzard, with no one to help her. She was about to give birth alone in the wilderness, and that's when she realized the worst part. She wasn't alone after all. Through the swirling snow, she saw a figure standing among the trees, motionless, watching her. At first, she thought it was a trick of the light, a hallucination born of pain and cold. A dark shape, tall and still, half hidden by the falling snow. She blinked, expecting it to vanish. It didn't. It took a step forward. It was a man. He wasn't one of the prospectors. He was dressed in buckskin leggings and a dark wool coat that was too big for him. His black hair was long, tied back with a leather cord. His face was all sharp angles and weathered skin, his eyes like dark flint, watching her. Apache. The stories from the wagon train came rushing back. Vicious, savage. Ghosts of the mountains who hated the gold seekers. She had never seen one. Until now. Fear, primal and sharp, gave her a surge of adrenaline. She struggled to sit up, her hands scrabbling for the knife in her pack. The man made no move, just continued his silent, unnerving assessment from 50 feet away. Then another contraction hit, a massive, tearing wave of pain that ripped a cry from her throat. She doubled over, gasping, her world narrowing to a single point of agony. When the wave passed, she looked up. He was closer, just beyond arm's reach. His expression was still unreadable, but something in his posture had shifted. "Please," she gasped, not knowing if he understood English, not even knowing what she was asking for. "My baby, it's coming." He tilted his head, his gaze moving from her swollen belly back to her face. He spoke a single word in a language she didn't understand. When she just stared at him, tears freezing on her cheeks, he tried again in broken, heavily accented English. "You, alone." She nodded, a fresh wave of despair washing over her. "They left me. The wagons." His expression flickered, a momentary darkening that looked like disgust. He glanced at the sky, then back at the trail. "Storm bad," he said. "Night come. Baby come. You die here." The blunt, brutal honesty of it should have terrified her. But after weeks of William's false promises and the Caldwells' empty assurances, it was almost a relief. "Yes," she whispered. "I know." He considered this for a long moment, his dark eyes seeming to weigh every possibility. Then with a sudden, decisive movement, he stepped forward. He began gathering her meager supplies, wrapping them efficiently in the tent canvas, his movements economical and sure. When he was done, he crouched beside her. "I help," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. "Not safe here. Have place." Sarah hesitated. This was madness. Trusting a complete stranger, an Apache warrior, was a death sentence of a different kind. But what was the alternative? Certain death, right here, in the snow. Her choice was between the death she knew and the death she didn't. She looked into his eyes and saw no malice, no pity, just a strange, compelling purpose. "What's your name?" she asked, the question a desperate grasp for some kind of connection, some piece of identity to cling to. He seemed surprised, as if a name was a luxury they couldn't afford. After a pause, he answered, Nako. I'm Sarah, she replied, just as another contraction seized her. She cried out, curling into a ball of pain. Nako waited patiently for it to pass. Then, with a gentleness that seemed completely at odds with his rugged appearance, he helped her to her feet. When it was clear she couldn't walk on her injured ankle, he lifted her as if she weighed nothing. He had already slung her pack over his shoulder. Hold, he instructed. She wrapped her arms around his neck, her face pressed against the rough wool of his coat. And then he started walking. He didn't follow the trail. He moved directly into the forest, navigating the steep, snow-covered terrain with the uncanny certainty of someone who knew every tree, every rock, every hidden path. The storm worsened, the wind howling, but beneath the thick canopy of the pines, the snowfall was lighter. Sarah drifted in and out of consciousness, the world a blur of white snow, dark trees, and searing pain. The contractions were coming faster, closer together. She bit her lip to keep from screaming, unwilling to show weakness to this stoic, silent man who had materialized from the storm like a spirit. Just when she thought she could endure no more, that she would die right there in his arms, the forest opened up. They were in a small, hidden valley nestled against a sheer cliff face, and there, partially concealed by an overhang of rock, was a cabin. Not a teepee, but a solid structure of logs and stone, a thin curl of smoke rising from its chimney. "Your home?" Sarah managed to ask, her voice a ragged whisper. Nako shook his head. "Old trapper cabin. Find empty. Make better." He carried her inside. A fire glowed in a stone hearth, filling the small space with warmth and the scent of pine smoke. The interior was sparse but clean. A raised platform covered with furs served as a bed. Shelves held neatly arranged supplies. Dried herbs hung from the rafters. Nako laid her gently on the furs, then moved with a quiet, practiced efficiency that was mesmerizing to watch. He built up the fire, heated water in a pot, and laid out clean, soft hides. It was clear this was not the first birth he had ever attended. The realization sent a shock of surprise, and then a profound wave of comfort through her. He knelt beside her, his hands steady and surprisingly gentle as he examined her. "Baby come soon," he said, his English more fluid now that they were in his space. "You strong. You not fear." It wasn't a question, it was a command. Sarah found herself nodding, drawing on a reserve of courage she didn't know she had. The hours that followed were a crucible of pain and effort. Nako stayed by her side, his presence a steady anchor in the storm of her labor. He gave her water, wiped her brow with a cool, damp cloth, and spoke to her in low, calm tones. Sometimes in his language, sometimes in simple English commands. "Breathe. Push. Good. Again." Outside, the blizzard raged. Inside, a different kind of storm was breaking. Sarah felt her strength giving out, her body screaming for release. "I can't," she sobbed, her voice raw. "I can't do it." Nako's voice cut through her exhaustion, calm and certain. "Baby waits for mother's courage," and he said. "You find, you bring to light." Something in his words and their strange, simple poetry ignited a final spark within her. She gathered every last ounce of her will, every shred of her anger and fear, and desperate love for this child she had never met, and she pushed. A cry tore from her throat, a sound that was less human than animal, a sound that came from the very center of the earth. And then, cutting through the howl of the wind, another sound, a thin, wavering cry, the first breath, the first protest, a new life, defiant and miraculous. Nako moved with swift tenderness, cleaning the infant, a girl, and wrapping her in soft rabbit furs. He placed the tiny, squirming bundle in Sarah's trembling arms. "Daughter," he said simply, "strong, like mother." Sarah stared down at the perfect, wrinkled face, the shock of dark hair, the tiny fists already clenched as if ready for a fight. Against all odds, against every cruelty man and nature had thrown at her, this child had arrived. "Elizabeth," Sarah whispered, the name a prayer. She named her for a grandmother she would never know, in a world she might never see again. She held her daughter close, the warmth of the tiny body a miracle against her skin. Outside, the storm began to quiet, as if the mountain itself was holding its breath. Nako brought her a cup of hot, bitter tea. "Drink," he said. "Give strength." As sleep began to pull her under, a deep, healing exhaustion, she managed one last question. "Why?" she whispered. "Why did you help me?" Nako paused, his back to the fire. When he turned, his face was cast in shadow, his eyes reflecting the flames. "Your people leave you," he said, each word chosen with care. "Cast away like broken thing. This is dishonor." He looked away from her, into the fire. "I have sister. Once. Men of your people find her alone." He fell silent, but the silence was filled with a grief so profound it was a physical presence in the room. "She not survive?" The story hung in the air, a story of a pain far deeper than her own. He had every reason to hate her, to leave her to the storm. Instead, he had chosen compassion. He had answered cruelty with kindness. "I'm sorry," she whispered, the words feeling small and useless. He made a small, dismissive gesture. "Long ago," he said. "Different path now." His gaze came back to her and the baby. "Sleep. Safe here." As Sarah drifted into sleep, her daughter cradled in her arms, her last conscious thought was of the bizarre, brutal, beautiful turns of fate. The men who should have protected her had tried to kill her, and the man who should have been her enemy had become her savior. In the heart of the wilderness, abandoned by civilization, she had found humanity. Sarah woke to the sound of a knife scraping against wood. For a moment, she was lost. The rough-hewn log walls, the smell of wood smoke, the weight of heavy furs. Then it all came flooding back. The abandonment, the storm, the birth, Elizabeth. She bolted upright, her heart hammering. The baby was right beside her, nestled in a makeshift cradle of furs, sleeping soundly. Relief washed over her, so intense it left her dizzy. Across the cabin, Nako sat by the fire, carving a piece of pine. He glanced up, saw she was awake, and gave a slight nod before returning to his work. The silence wasn't awkward, it was peaceful. A quiet rhythm of existence she hadn't felt in months. She carefully shifted to a sitting position. Her body was sore, exhausted, but it felt whole, functional. The cabin in the light of day was a marvel of resourcefulness. Every tool had its place. Every bundle of herbs, every stack of firewood was arranged with a meticulous care that spoke of a deep respect for survival. "How long did I sleep?" she asked, her voice hoarse. "Sunrise, set, rise again," Nako answered without looking up. "Baby wake twice. Eat well." Sarah stared at him. "I slept through her crying?" He looked up then, a flicker of something like amusement in his dark eyes. "I wake you. You feed. You not remember." She had no memory of it. She must have been operating on pure instinct, a mother's response from the depths of exhaustion. The thought was both alarming and incredible. "Thank you," she said, the words feeling utterly inadequate. He acknowledged her with another small nod, then rose and brought her a wooden bowl of warm stew. It smelled of game and wild herbs. "Eat," he said. "Make milk strong." As she ate the rich, savory broth, she watched him. His hands were powerful, yet they moved with a surgeon's precision as he carved. She felt a growing need to understand her situation. "When I'm stronger," she began, "will you take us to a settlement?" His hands stilled. He looked up, and his expression was one she couldn't quite decipher. It wasn't pity, but it was close. "No settlement close," he said. 5 days walk. Good weather. Pass closed now. Snow come early. But my husband, someone will come looking for me." Even as she said it, the words tasted like a lie. The image of Thomas Caldwell's cold eyes was burned into her memory. William had made his choice. "Gold seekers not return," Nako said, confirming her deepest fear. "Trail buried. No one come until spring." Spring. The word sounded like a foreign country. Months away, an impossible distance across a sea of snow and ice. "We'll die here," she whispered, the reality crashing down on her. Nako shook his head, a slow, deliberate movement. "Not die. You learn new way." He gestured around the cabin. "Shelter good. Food here. Firewood here. We survive. The certainty in his voice was a lifeline. You mean you'll let us stay? For the winter? He shrugged as if the answer was obvious. Baby not survive journey. You not survive alone. Answer simple. His pragmatism was a strange comfort. There was no false hope, but there was no despair either. Only the clear-eyed reality of the challenge ahead. But why? She pressed, still struggling to understand his motive. Why would you do this for us? He was silent for a long time, staring into the fire. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. My people teach that a man who will not help a mother and child has no spirit. He is hollow. He looked at her then, his gaze direct and intense. The world has enough cruelty. I not add more. There was more to his story, she knew. The sister, the grief he carried, but she also knew not to push. She nodded, accepting his answer, accepting the unbelievable reality of her new life. They would winter here, in this hidden cabin, under the protection of this silent, sorrowful man. I won't be a burden, she said, her voice firm. I'll work. I can cook. I can sew. I learn fast. A ghost of a smile touched his lips for the first time. Already see you strong, he said. Not worry about burden. Just then, Elizabeth let out a waking cry. Sarah gathered her daughter into her arms, marveling again at the tiny, perfect miracle of her. As she nursed the baby, Nako discreetly moved to the far side of the cabin, giving her a privacy she hadn't even thought to ask for. The small gesture of respect touched her deeply. Later that day, he brought in 2 rabbits from his traps. He showed her, step by step, how to skin and prepare them, explaining how every part of the animal was used. Nothing wasted. The meat for food, the fur for warmth, the bones for tools. He spoke in his sparse English, but his hands were eloquent, teaching her a new language of survival. She watched, memorizing every movement. If she was to survive, she had to become a partner, not a passenger. That evening, as the wind began to howl outside, whipping snow against the cabin walls, she asked him a question that had been lingering in her mind. Where did you learn English? He paused in his work, mending a snowshoe with a piece of rawhide. Army fort, he said, his voice flat. 2 winters. Scout for them. You worked for the soldiers? The surprise was evident in her voice. His expression darkened. Was young. Thought white man's world had place for Apache who help. The bitterness in his tone told the rest of the story. What happened? She asked softly. Gold found, he said, his voice hard. Treaties broken. Land taken. Old story. He looked up at her, his face a mask of stoicism again. The subject was closed. Fat snowflakes began to drift past the cabin's single small window. The first big storm, he said, his tone neutral, will last many days. But he didn't sound worried. He sounded prepared. The neat stacks of firewood, the shelves of dried food, the well-maintained tools. He lived in a world of certainty. Winter comes. You prepare. It was so different from the frantic, desperate scramble of the gold rush. That night, as the blizzard raged outside, Sarah lay awake, Elizabeth sleeping soundly beside her. The grief for her old life finally came, a silent, crushing wave. Grief for the home she'd lost, for the husband who had betrayed her, for the naive girl she had been. She wept without a sound, her tears soaking into the furs. From across the dark cabin, Nako's voice came, soft and low. Cry good. Let spirit pain out. Tomorrow cry done. Work begin. His words, his simple acknowledgement of her sorrow, were a strange and powerful comfort. He didn't offer pity. He offered a path forward. She wiped her eyes. Thank you, she whispered into the darkness. For everything. He didn't answer. But as she finally drifted off to sleep, the storm howling its fury outside, she felt, for the first time since leaving Springfield, a flicker of something she had thought was lost forever. She felt safe. The irony was not lost on her. She had found more humanity in this supposed savage than in all the civilized men who had left her for dead. The blizzard lasted for 5 days. The world outside the cabin disappeared under a deep, silent blanket of white. Inside, a new rhythm took hold, a life dictated by the needs of the fire, the baby, and their own survival. Sarah's strength returned slowly. Nako's herbal teas and rich broths healed her body, while the simple, demanding work of their daily existence began to heal her spirit. He was a patient teacher. He showed her how to mix clay and moss to patch the chinks in the log walls, how to tell by the color of the smoke if the fire was burning too hot or too cool, how to grind dried berries into a coarse flour. She was a quick student, her mind sharp and her hands eager to work. The confined space of the cabin, which should have felt like a prison, began to feel like a sanctuary, a world with clear rules and immediate tangible rewards. Tend the fire, and you are warm. Prepare the food, and you do not go hungry. Care for your child, and she thrives. Elizabeth was the quiet center of their small universe. Nako, who had seemed so stoic and distant, revealed a surprising tenderness toward the baby. He crafted a cradle board for her, a traditional Apache carrier, decorating the wooden frame with intricate symbols he didn't explain. When Elizabeth was fussy, he would sometimes sing to her in his own language, low melodic chants that seemed to soothe her when nothing else would. Sarah would watch them, a fierce, protective feeling swelling in her chest. This was her daughter's first family, her first home, a world away from the life she had imagined, but a world that was, in its own way, complete. On the sixth day, the storm broke. The sky that emerged was a brilliant, piercing blue, the snow-covered valley so bright it hurt to look at. Nako went out on his snowshoes to check his traps and scout the pass. He returned at dusk, the grim set of his jaw telling Sarah everything she needed to know. Pass is closed, he said, stamping snow from his moccasins. Deep drifts, no way through until spring. Even though she had expected it, the finality of his words sent a chill through her. They were truly, completely cut off. Do we have enough? She asked, her voice tight. Enough food to last? He nodded. If we are careful, and if the hunting is good. He looked at her, his expression serious. Tomorrow I teach you the snowshoes. You must learn to move in the deep snow. It is the only way. Her first attempts were a disaster. She stumbled and fell into the soft powder, emerging sputtering and covered in white. Nako never laughed, but she saw the amusement dancing in his eyes. He was patient, showing her how to shift her weight, how to lift her feet. By the end of the day, she could walk 100 yards without falling. Elizabeth, snug in her cradle board on Sarah's back, seemed to enjoy the rhythmic, swaying motion. Good, Nako said as they returned to the cabin. You learn fast. The simple praise meant more to her than any compliment she had ever received in her life. Days melted into weeks. Sarah's world, once filled with the petty concerns of town life, was now focused on the elemental truths of survival. She learned to read the stories written in the snow, the delicate tracks of a snowshoe hare, the heavy prints of a deer, the predatory path of a mountain lion. She learned which barks could be boiled into a tea to soothe a cough, and which roots dug from the frozen ground could be roasted for a meal. The woman she had been in Springfield was a ghost, a distant memory. Her hands, once soft, were now calloused and capable. Her body, once a vessel for a child, was now a strong, resilient tool. She was becoming a creature of the mountains, shaped by the cold, the silence, and the constant, demanding presence of the wilderness. One evening, as the days grew shorter and the winter solstice approached, she found herself thinking of Christmas. It must be close, she said, more to herself than to Nako. He looked up from the arrow he was fletching. 7 days, he said, until your winter ceremony. She was stunned. You know about Christmas? Army Fort had missionaries, he said, his tone neutral. It was just another fact, another piece of the white man's world he had observed. We should do something, she said, for Elizabeth, even if she won't remember. He seemed to consider this. Then he rose and went to a small leather pouch hanging on the wall. He returned to the fire and held out his hand. In his palm lay a small carved wooden figure. It was a woman holding an infant. The lines were simple, but it was unmistakably her and Elizabeth. The wood was polished to a soft, warm sheen. You made this, she whispered, taking it from him. It was the object he had been carving that first morning she had woken up in the cabin. Apache way, he explained. New life needs a guardian spirit. This keeps mother strong, child safe. She turned the small carving over in her hands, moved beyond words. It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. Not a Christmas gift, he said almost shyly. Different meaning. But, he paused, can be for both, if you wish. His sensitivity, his willingness to bridge the gap between their two worlds, touched her to her core. Tell me about your traditions, she asked softly. For the winter. He hesitated, then his voice took on a different quality, more fluid, less guarded. Winter is the time for stories, he said, his eyes reflecting the firelight. A time to remember who we are. A child born in the snow is special. They see truths that others miss. They have a strong spirit. He looked at Elizabeth, sleeping in her cradleboard. She will be a strong woman. A comfortable silence fell between them. It was in these quiet moments that their bond deepened. They were two survivors from different worlds, brought together by cruelty and chance, who were slowly, carefully, building a world of their own. What about your family, Nako? She asked, the question feeling both necessary and dangerous. Do you have children? His expression shuddered, the light in his eyes dimming. Had a wife, he said, his voice barely a whisper. And a son. Many winters ago. The past tense was a wound. Sarah didn't push. I'm sorry, she said simply. He gave a single sharp nod. Tomorrow we hunt, he said, changing the subject, retreating back into the safety of practical things. As Sarah lay down to sleep that night, the small carving clutched in her hand. She thought about the terrible, beautiful irony of her life. The civilized Christian men had abandoned her. The so-called savage had shown her the true meaning of grace. She had been taught to fear his people, to see them as godless heathens. But in this small, hidden cabin, she had found more honor, more kindness, and more faith than she had ever known in a church pew. She had lost everything she thought she wanted, only to find everything she truly needed. January brought a cold so deep it felt like a living thing. The world outside the cabin was frozen solid, a sculpture of ice and snow. The days were short, the nights long and filled with the sound of the wind scouring the peaks. They were confined to the cabin for days at a time, and in that enforced intimacy, their partnership deepened. He taught her his language, not in formal lessons, but by naming the world around them. Ishi for deer, Tso for the pine trees, Nade for the people, his people. In return, she read to him from her journal. Not the angry entry about her abandonment, but stories from her childhood in Pennsylvania, descriptions of green fields and bustling towns, a world he had only ever seen from the hostile periphery. You paint pictures with word, he said one evening, after she described the chaos of a county fair. Good storyteller. My mother used to say I noticed things others missed, she replied. Important skill, he said, his eyes serious. To see what is, not what you expect to see. This is how we survive. She was learning that skill from him every day. She was learning to see the subtle shift in the clouds that foretold a storm, to hear the difference between a twig snapped by the wind and one snapped by the hoof of a deer. Her senses, dulled by the comfortable predictability of civilized life, were waking up. One afternoon, a rare day when the sun was bright and the wind was still, Nako looked at her with an uncharacteristic hesitation. Today is 1 year, he said, his voice low, since my wife and son walked to the spirit world. The sudden intimacy of the confession stunned her. What happened? She asked gently. His face was a mask of grief, but his voice was steady, reciting a story he had clearly told himself 1,000 times. Soldiers, he said, a new commander at the fort, said my people stole cattle. It was a lie. His hands clenched into fists. They came to the village at dawn, to punish us. He didn't need to say more. The word punished contained a universe of horror. I was hunting. I came back to ashes. What were their names? She asked, the question an instinct. To name the dead is to honor them. He looked at her, surprised. My wife was Nita. It means the one who laughs. My son was Chaitin. Falcon. Nita, Sarah repeated softly. Chaitin. She looked at him, her heart aching for the pain he carried in such silence. "Tell me about them." And he did. For the first time, he opened the door to his past. He spoke of his wife's skill with beadwork, of her laugh that sounded like water over stones. He described his 4-year-old son, who could already mimic the call of a hawk and knew the names of all the plants in the forest. He spoke not of their deaths, but of their lives, and as he spoke, it was as if he brought them back, just for a moment, into the warm, firelit cabin. When he fell silent, the pipe he was smoking long since extinguished, Sarah felt that the space between them had changed forever. They were no longer just a rescuer and the rescued. They were two people who had both lost worlds, who understood the language of grief. "Is that why you live alone?" she asked. "Why you came here?" He nodded. "The mountains are quiet. They do not judge." He looked at her. "Until you." A faint smile touched his lips. "Life has a strange path." Elizabeth stirred in her cradleboard, and the moment of shared sorrow was broken. Nako stood and went to the door. "I will check the snares," he said, needing to be alone with his ghosts. Sarah understood. As she nursed her daughter, she thought about how fate had woven their two broken stories together, creating something new, something strong, in this forgotten corner of the world. February brought a false thaw. The snow softened, and the sound of dripping water was a constant music. It was on one of these warmer days that Nako insisted Elizabeth needed to experience the world. "Child needs sun, air," he said. "Good for spirit." Sarah was nervous, but she trusted him. They wrapped the baby warmly and took her to a sheltered, sunny spot where the snow had melted, revealing the damp earth beneath. For the first time, they laid Elizabeth directly on a buffalo hide on the ground. Her reaction was pure joy. Her dark eyes, so like Nako's, grew wide as she stared up at the vast blue sky. Her tiny hands reached for the light, her legs kicking with excitement. She was a child of the wilderness, and she was home. "She loves it," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. Nako was watching the baby, and a rare, genuine smile transformed his face. "Of course," he said, "her spirit knows this place." Watching them together, Sarah was struck by a powerful realization. This life, this harsh, demanding, beautiful life, was better for her daughter than the one she had lost. Here Elizabeth was not a future wife or a social asset. She was a spirit, a being connected to the living world around her. "I never properly thanked you," Sarah said suddenly. "Not just for saving us, but for this, for showing me this." Nako shook his head. "No thanks needed. Between family." The word hung in the air between them. Family. They were not bound by blood or law. They were bound by something stronger. Shared survival, mutual respect, a quiet, growing affection that neither of them had ever named. Before she could respond, Nako tensed. His head snapped up, his body instantly alert. He was listening. "What is it?" she whispered, reaching for Elizabeth. "Listen," he commanded. At first she heard nothing but the drip of melting snow and the call of a bird. Then she heard it, a faint rhythmic sound, completely alien to the valley. Thump, thump, thump. "Axe," Nako said, his voice a low growl. "On the far side of the ridge." Sarah's blood ran cold. The sound was too close. "Settlers? So early?" Nako was already on his feet, scanning the horizon. "Not settlers. Prospectors." He turned to her, his face grim. "Stay here, out of sight. I will go see." "No," she said, her voice firm, surprising them both. She gathered Elizabeth into her arms. "We stay together." He looked at her, a flicker of something, pride perhaps, in his eyes. He nodded once. "Follow me. Step where I step. No sound." They moved through the forest like ghosts. Nako led them to a high vantage point, a rocky outcropping that overlooked the next valley. Below, nestled in the trees, was a crude camp. 3 canvas tents, a fire, and 5 men. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The distance was great, but she recognized the arrogant set of their shoulders, the careless way they moved through the wilderness they sought to conquer. One of them turned and the pale afternoon sun glinted off his beard. "It's them," she whispered, her voice shaking. "The Caldwells." She scanned the other figures, her heart pounding a frantic, sick rhythm. And then she saw him, taller than the others, standing by the fire. He had a beard now, but she knew him. She would know him anywhere. "And William," she said, the name like ash in her mouth. "My husband is there." Nako's hand rested on the hilt of his knife. His expression was granite. The sanctuary they had built was no longer safe. The world they had escaped had found them. Seeing them was like seeing ghosts. Ghosts from a life that felt a century away. William, the Caldwells. They were laughing, sharing a flask around the fire, their voices carrying faintly on the wind. They looked prosperous. They had survived the winter in comfort, while she had been fighting for her life in a blizzard. The injustice of it was a bitter pill. "They must have wintered nearby," she whispered, her mind racing. "And now they're back, trying to get a head start on the spring rush." "They have found gold," Nako said, his voice a low rumble. He pointed to a sluice box set up by the stream. "Not much, but enough to make them stay. Enough to make them greedy." Greed. That was the engine that drove their world. It was the reason she was here, hiding on a rocky ledge with a man who should have been her enemy, holding a child her husband had never seen. "What do you want to do?" Nako asked, his eyes fixed on her, not on the men below. The question caught her off guard. It wasn't a strategic question. It was a question about her heart. She could go to them. She could walk down into that camp and confront William. She could demand her place back, demand that he acknowledge his child. But as she looked at the men below, at their casual arrogance, at the rifles leaning against the tents, she knew what that would mean. They saw the world in terms of ownership. William would see her as his wife, his property. He would see Elizabeth as his child, his bloodline. He would see Nako as a savage, an obstacle. She looked down at the sleeping baby in her arms. Then she looked at Nako, his face calm and resolute beside her. He was waiting for her answer. He was giving her the choice. "They left me to die," she said, her voice cold and clear. "They don't deserve to know we survived." A faint look of relief passed over Nako's face. He nodded once. "A wise choice. A man who abandons his family has poison in his spirit. Not safe for you. Not for the child." "But we have to watch them," she said, her fear sharpening into a strategic focus he had taught her. "If they're here, more will follow. We need to know where they go, what they do." "You think like Apache now," he said, a glint of approval in his eyes. "Knowledge is strength." They watched until dusk, silent observers learning the rhythms of their enemy. As the light faded, they retreated as carefully as they had come, melting back into the forest. Back in the safety of their cabin, the reality of their situation settled in. The world had shrunk. Their hidden valley was no longer a sanctuary, but a potential trap. "Will they find us?" she asked, voicing her deepest fear. Nako shook his head. "This valley is not on their path. They would have to be very lost, or very lucky." He secured the heavy wooden bar across the door. "But we will be careful. No big fires. No hunting near the ridge." He paused, his expression solemn. "And if they do find us, we will be ready." The weeks that followed were lived on a knife's edge. Every strange sound, every distant bird call, sent a jolt of anxiety through Sarah. Nako became even more a creature of the shadows, his scouting trips longer, his returns quieter. The brief thaw of February gave way to the final, bitter cold of March. The snow returned, heavy and deep, and for a while their valley was once again an isolated fortress. The renewed winter was a blessing, a white wall between them and the men on the other side of the ridge. During these tense, quiet days, their bond became unbreakable. They moved around the small cabin in a silent, practiced dance. They were no longer just two people surviving together. They were a unit, a family forged in crisis and defined by a shared, unspoken purpose: to protect Elizabeth. One evening after Nako returned from a long, cold scout, he brought out a small leather pouch. The buckskin was soft, decorated with intricate beadwork. "For you," he said. She took it from him. "It's beautiful." "It is a medicine bag," he explained, "for protection. The beads are a pattern for a safe journey." He gestured for her to open it. Inside was a collection of small treasures: a smooth gray stone, a single hawk feather, a bundle of dried herbs, and a small carved wooden disc. Each has a meaning, he said. Stone from a high place to see clearly, feather from a hawk to be swift, herbs to heal, carving to protect the child. The thoughtfulness of the gift, the layers of meaning and care, overwhelmed her. This was his culture, his faith, and he was sharing it with her. He was weaving her into his world, just as she had woven him into hers. She tied the pouch to her belt. I will never take it off, she promised. As March bled into April, the true spring finally arrived. The snow melted with astonishing speed, and the mountainside exploded with life. Green shoots pushed through the damp earth. Wildflowers bloomed in a riot of color. The world felt new, reborn. But the thaw also brought renewed danger. The prospectors' camp grew. Nako reported more tents, more men. The sound of their axes was a constant, dull threat on the wind. And then one morning, the threat became real. Sarah was outside tending to a small garden she had started when Nako appeared at the edge of the forest. He moved not with his usual stealth, but with a terrifying urgency. Inside, he said, his voice sharp. Now. She didn't hesitate. She grabbed Elizabeth and ran. Inside the cabin, he barred the door. 5 of them, he said, his voice low and tight. Crossing the ridge. Armed. They are following a trail. His eyes met hers, and she knew before he said the words. The man in the lead is your husband. They had been found. There was no time for fear. Their drills, their contingency plans took over. The cave, Sarah said, her voice steady. It was their emergency shelter. A small hidden cavern, half a mile away, stocked with supplies. Go, Nako commanded, already moving through the cabin, obscuring any signs of recent habitation. Take the stream bed. Leave no tracks. I will follow. I will lead them on a false trail first. She slung the emergency pack on her back and secured Elizabeth in her carrier. At the door, she paused, a terrible thought striking her. This might be the last time she ever saw this cabin, this home. She looked at Nako. Wait for me at the cave, he said, his voice softer now. I will come. She ran. The journey through the cold, rushing water of the stream was treacherous, but it hid her tracks. She reached the cave, its entrance concealed by a curtain of willows, and slipped inside. And then she waited. The minutes stretched into an eternity. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves was the sound of approaching doom. An hour passed, then another. Just as despair began to set in, she heard it, a soft bird call, a specific pattern they had arranged, a signal. He was back. Nako slipped into the cave, his face grim. They found the cabin, he said. They are searching it now. How? She asked. How did they find us? A skilled tracker, he said. They have one now. He found the signs, a cut branch, a worn path, small things. He knelt beside her. Your husband, he will not stop looking. He knows you are alive. The fragile piece of their hidden world was shattered. They couldn't run. The high passes were still snowed in. They couldn't hide, not from a skilled tracker. Then what do we do? She whispered. Nako looked at her, his eyes dark and serious. We do not hide, he said. We confront them. The idea was terrifying, but he was right. It was better to choose the time and place of the confrontation than to be cornered like frightened animals. On our terms, he said. Words first, violence only if they choose it. He took her hand, his grip firm and steady. We are stronger together. She looked into his calm, determined face, and her fear gave way to resolve. They had survived a blizzard. They had survived the winter. They would survive this. Together, she agreed. They waited for dawn. They chose their ground, a small, open meadow, visible from all sides but bordered by forest for a quick retreat. As the first rays of sun touched the peaks, they moved into position. Sarah stood by a large boulder, Elizabeth secure on her back. Nako stood just behind her, a silent, watchful shadow. Then they heard the voices, William's voice, calling out, directing the search. He emerged from the trees first, rifle in hand. He stopped dead, his face a mask of disbelief. Sarah? He breathed, the name a stunned whisper across the meadow. My God, you're alive. He started toward her, his face a storm of conflicting emotions. Joy, relief, confusion. "Stop there, William," she called out, her voice clear and strong. It echoed in the morning stillness. "That's close enough." He halted, the other men fanning out behind him. Robert Caldwell's face was pale. "Sarah," William said, his voice pleading, "we've been searching for you. They told me there was an accident, that you were gone." "There was no accident, William," she said, her gaze locking with Robert Caldwell's. "They left me to die." The truth landed in the meadow like a boulder. She watched William's face as he processed it, as he looked from her to the Caldwells, the pieces of their betrayal clicking into place. Just then, Elizabeth made a small, fussy sound. William's eyes snapped to the carrier on Sarah's back. "Is that—" Sarah shifted, bringing her daughter around to her front. She held up the child for her father to see for the first time. A beautiful, healthy baby with dark eyes and a shock of black hair. "This is Elizabeth," Sarah said. "She was born in the storm. The man you see behind me is the one who saved us. The man who delivered your daughter while you were searching for gold." The confrontation she had dreaded was here. The two halves of her life, the past and the present, were facing each other across a field of wildflowers. And Sarah, the woman standing in the middle, was no longer the person who had left Springfield. She was a survivor, a mother, and she was ready to fight for her new life. William stared at his daughter, his face a canvas of shock, grief, and dawning wonder. "My daughter," he whispered. "She's alive." "No thanks to you," Sarah said, her voice hard. She gestured to Nako. "We are alive because of him." William's gaze finally shifted to Nako. The wonder on his face curdled into suspicion, then into a dark, possessive anger. "You've been living with him? With an Indian?" "I have been living with the man who saved my life," she corrected sharply, "who built us a home while my husband abandoned us, who showed more honor in one night than you and your partners have shown in your entire lives." "Sarah, that's enough," William snapped, taking a step forward. "Whatever happened, it's over. We're here now. You and the baby will come back to camp with us." The sheer arrogance of it, the assumption that he could just snap his fingers and erase the past 9 months, was breathtaking. Sarah laughed, a short, bitter sound. "No, William, we are not going anywhere with you. This is our home now." "That child is white," Robert Caldwell snarled, stepping forward, his rifle held loosely but ready. "She belongs with her people." "Her people are right here," Sarah shot back, pulling Elizabeth closer. "This is my wife and my daughter," William said, his voice rising, addressing Nako directly for the first time. "This does not concern you." Nako took a single, deliberate step forward, placing himself slightly in front of Sarah. His voice was calm, but it carried the weight of the mountains. "The wife you left to die," he said, "the daughter you never saw born, they are my family now. The mother chooses her path. The child stays with the mother." "Now see here," one of the other prospectors, a man with cold, dead eyes, started to say, his hand moving toward the pistol on his hip. "We can end this right now." Before the man's hand could clear the holster, Nako moved. It wasn't a blur of motion. It was something faster, something more elemental. A knife appeared in his hand. He didn't raise it. He didn't threaten. He just held it. And the sight of it, the absolute certainty of the man holding it, froze everyone in place. "4 of you might die before I fall," Nako said, his voice a low, chilling whisper. "Which of you is willing to pay that price for another man's pride?" The raw, brutal calculus hung in the air. The prospectors looked at each other. They were here for gold, not to die in a forgotten meadow for a woman and a baby they didn't know. William looked from the unwavering steel in Nako's hand to the defiant fire in Sarah's eyes. Something inside him seemed to break. He slowly raised his hands, a gesture of surrender. He looked at Sarah, and for the first time, she didn't see a greedy prospector or a weak husband. She saw a man drowning in his own regret. "Let me just see her," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "Please, just once." Sarah hesitated, then gave a slight nod. Nako didn't move, his knife still a silent promise. William stepped forward, his eyes locked on Elizabeth. He reached out a trembling hand and gently touched his daughter's cheek. Elizabeth, unafraid, looked at this strange new face with wide, curious eyes. William's face crumpled. "I thought you were dead," he choked out. "I swear to God, Sarah, I searched for you. And when you couldn't find me, you went back to your gold," she said, not as an accusation, but as a simple statement of fact. He flinched, unable to deny it. He looked at Elizabeth, then at Nako, and finally at her. He saw the truth. He saw the family they had become. He saw that there was no place for him here. He had not just lost his wife and child, he had been replaced. He took a step back and slowly, deliberately, laid his rifle on the ground. A truce. "We'll go," he said, his voice hollow. He turned to the other men. "There's nothing for us here." "What?" Robert Caldwell exploded. "Mitchell, have you lost your mind? That's your child." "And she is alive and safe," William said, his voice gaining a strength Sarah hadn't heard in years. "Which is more than we deserve. We are leaving." He looked back at Sarah, a final desperate question in his eyes. "What will you do?" "We will live," Sarah said simply. William held her gaze for a long moment. He saw the woman she had become, strong, resilient, unbroken. He saw the life she had chosen, and in an act of grace she never would have expected, he let it go. He nodded once, a gesture of finality. He turned his back on them, picked up his rifle, and led his men back into the trees. They were gone. The meadow was quiet again. The sun was warm on her face. Elizabeth gurgled happily in her arms. Sarah looked at Nako. He sheathed his knife. The crisis over. He stepped to her side, his arm coming around her shoulders. A simple, solid gesture of protection and belonging. She leaned into his strength, her head resting against his chest. She had been abandoned by one family, only to find another. She had been left for dead in the wilderness, only to find a truer life than she had ever known. The gold rush could have its fortunes and its fools. The world could continue its frantic, greedy spin. Here in this quiet meadow, with this man and this child, she had found something far more precious. She had found her home. The path ahead was uncertain. The world of men and their greed would surely encroach on their sanctuary again. But they would face it, as they had faced everything else, together. Two survivors bound by the cruelty of others, who had found in the heart of the wilderness not just a way to live, but a reason to. If you enjoyed this story of survival and unlikely love, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell. We've got more tales from the edge of the world coming your way, and you won't want to miss a single one. Let us know in the comments, do you think William did the right thing in the end?